My name is Ted Reichel. I started using Rhino about a year ago. I spent 2 solid months actually learning how to run it. Yes, it does have a steep learning curve. However, I'm hoping that with some of these videos that I'll be able to shorten that learning curve for others. Rhino is very much a general purpose program. It can be used from very simple things to extremely complex things like automobile body design. As I used it, I became aware that one of the things that was encumbering me was the menu system. You'll notice that my menu is quite customized, and it does not look anything like what a standard Rhino menu will look like. As I watched the YouTube tutorials, it became clear to me that many of the people demonstrating the software were typing a lot of commands. That indicated to me that the commands are so buried in the menu system, the icons, that it became simpler to run it from a command line. Well, that isn't how I work, and it isn't how a lot of other people work. So I decided to customize it after I became familiar with what commands I use the most. Even though it's customized, I still have access to all of the commands that are available in Rhino. I haven't crippled it in any manner. In a later video, we'll talk about how to customize it, but for the time being, I'll try to mention which commands I'm using when I'm working so that you'll know which ones to look for. The first thing I would like to do is demonstrate my workflow to you, and that will give you a feeling for how this will work. Before I start, though, I'd like to mention that I use this software as my primary design tool. I also use Vectric Aspire, and I run a CNC router and a 3D printer. The 3D printer is what really drove me over to Rhino. It's not possible to design true 3D models over an Aspire. That isn't saying anything bad about Aspire. Aspire has some extremely nice features to it, especially if you're doing a lot of 3D carving relief type work. Okay, so let's show you how I go about working with this system. The first thing I'm going to do is switch to my top view. Zoom out a bit, and I've moved my picture, add a picture plane up here so it's readily accessible. In standard Rhino, this is buried in several different menus, and like things that are buried in menus, sometimes you forget where they are. So let's go ahead and open up a piece of clip art. This particular piece of clip art came off the internet. I'm using it for demonstration purposes. It is a bitmap image, and I'm going to go ahead and put this in. I'm just going to click and then drag it. It'll maintain the aspect ratio of the bitmap image, so I don't have to worry about goofing it up by stretching it in the wrong direction. And at this point, size really doesn't matter, because remember, we're going to be working in vectors, and vectors are totally scalable. So I'll go ahead and click and accept this as my image. Typically, the next thing I'll do is select it, and I'll move it around. You can use the arrow keys, and that'll control moving right and left, up and down. By the way, these arrow keys are part of what's called the gumball. And you'll notice down here on the bottom that I have my gumball turned on. I leave it on all the time. I find it very useful. Other people tend not to use it. That's a choice you make. You can also move it by clicking on this window pane, and it'll move in X and Y at the same time. And I'm just going to more or less center it in a drawing, no particular reason, but I like things there. Zoom it up a bit. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the properties of this a bit. And I'm going to do that by clicking on my properties and then coming down to the material. I think of it as the toothpaste tube. Select the material, and when I look towards the bottom of this window, I'll see something called object transparency. I want to make this a little bit transparent, so I'm going to set it right up at around 65 to 75%, and that'll be good for me. The next thing I'd like to do is eliminate the parts of the drawing that I really don't need up on the screen. If you look at this carefully, this is a piece that is designed to be mirrored over the y-axis, and it's also designed to be mirrored over the x-axis. So what I'll typically do is I'll select my line tool, and I will draw, zoom in a bit so I can see where I'm at, and I will just draw a line holding down my shift key, which will give me true vertical. Select the line, and I want it to extend past the bitmap image because I'm going to trim this off, and I'm going to repeat that process. You can also use line from midpoint. If you notice, I have this option up right up top where I can get it, which is very handy. I can come in, click here. Now when I hold the shift and I drag across, I'll have a long enough line. You'll notice that this line is quite long. That's no big deal. We're going to get rid of it in a minute. But the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select everything by dragging from right to left and then clicking my trim tool. And what I want to trim out is I want to get rid of this piece, this one, and this one. Then while these two lines are still selected, I'm pressing the delete key on my keyboard, excuse me. Now it's Control Z. I want to select these two and delete them. And now I've gotten rid of that. The last thing I'm going to do to this image is I'm going to change its layer. I'm going to move it down to layer number 5, right click and select Change Object Layer. While I'm at it, I'm going to rename this, so I just left mouse click in there and I type bitmap so I know where my bitmap is. I'm going to lock it. Now we cannot move this item when we're drawing on it. There's no way to select it unless I unlock it. Okay, let's go ahead and start designing something. I'm going to concentrate on this C-shaped piece. This is a fairly complex item, even though it has a very simple shape. The first thing I want to do is create some vectors that I can use to trace it. I like to use curve interpolate points. A lot of other people will use control point through curve. It's a matter of preference. Try them out, try both of them out, and use the one that you prefer. So I'll go ahead and click, and I'm going to start right here and start clicking my way around. There's no reason to get crazy about when you're doing this, because you can always adjust it very easily if you make a mistake. For instance, I'm going to make one on purpose here and get way out there. I'm just going to keep going. Put my points back on the curve, and I'm going to continue to draw around it. One of the things you want to do is try to keep these points as far apart as you can. That makes for a much smoother curve. It makes for a lot less editing of that curve and easier editing when you need to do it. If you start clicking everywhere on the line, you'll have so many points that it becomes very difficult to edit it later on. One of the other things you'll learn is that as you go along, one of your friends can be this icon up here, which is rebuild a curve. It doesn't always work as well as you'd like it to work, and we'll get to that in a minute after I adjust this mistake I made. So I'm going to select the control point, use the window pane, and I'm going to pull it more back in. Notice that it will affect previous, so you might have to adjust the ones on either side of it after you make that slight edit. Okay, we were talking a minute ago about using this smooth curve. I'm going to select the command, click the curve, right mouse click, which is enter. Now you'll see that the black line is showing the preview of what we will get if we execute this command. The point count on the current line is 29. The degree is 4. Typically I use 3, so I'll go to 3 there. But the reason the black line is so different is there's not enough points, so we're going to start upping that. And I'm going to up it fairly quickly, and you'll see the change. And you'll notice that at the ends here it has a problem. That's because it tends to space the points out differently than when you drew them. We're getting closer to where I was. By the way, what this does is it creates, believe it or not, a smoother curve. It may not look smoother to you here, but in mathematics that is actually a bit smoother. But that's why I say if you're going to use this, you need to be careful. If you have these things that come in tight at the end, it'll quite alter them quite a bit. I'm going to go ahead and let it do the 29 points and say OK and select the line, and you'll see that it's reduced the number of points in this area from what we originally clicked. That's okay. This is just a demonstration. Let's go ahead and create the rest of the vectors. Once again, use the curve, interpolate points, and I'm going to make sure that it snaps to the endpoint. Over here on the right, I've moved my snap panel so it's easy to accept or access. So I'll click there, and I'll just work my way around it. This is quite quick. Sometimes the snap can cause you problems when you start getting close to other things. If that's the case, just turn it off until you do need it again. As you can see, I'm working my way around here. Back up a little bit here, catch that point. By the way, you can zoom in and out and you can pan around while you're in the middle of a command. There's no reason to start and stop, zoom. Just go ahead and use your mouse and it'll get you around to where you want to go. So that point is complete. There are two ways to get the vector you need underneath here. One is to go ahead and start tracing again and guessing where the loop would be here. Another way that's, I don't want to say it's easier, but it works, is to select both of these curves, and I do a Control-C, Control-V to copy and paste one, and then I move them, and I'm going to just put them pretty much where they need to be. And now I'm going to have to edit both curves to actually get them where they want to go. And the other thing I'm going to do while I have this selected is I'm going to change these two curves to a different layer and give them a different color. So I'm going to select my layer 1 over on the right, and I'm going to go to the color block, and I'm going to change it to a red, and click OK. What I forgot to do there was move them over, so I'll select both of them, and I will move them to that layer by using Change Object Layer. So now I can distinguish the lower set of curves from the upper set of curves. So let's talk about adjusting this. When this piece of artwork was drawn, it becomes questionable how the artist decided that this curve got all the way down here. I'm not going to worry about it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to alter it. And I'm going to do that by selecting these points and moving them. Getting them to where I can deal with them nicely. So I've got that curve where I need it now. I'm going to move this point at the end. I want to make sure that's still contacts there. We'll need it later. And now we need to move a bunch of these points. One of the things you can do is use the control points, show object control points. And I'm going to select this object. And now it'll always show me the control points for that object, even when I don't have it selected. And I'm going to start with these 2 points, and I'm going to move them in, and I'm going to grab these 2 and move them in a bit. This takes a little bit of finessing and keeping an eye on where things are going. But you can see we're getting there. By the way, this area under here won't matter in the end. Now it's just a matter of tweaking these into where you want them. Okay, I'm going to call that pretty good for my purposes. I'm going to come over here This one's going to be a little easier. I'll be able to probably just grab these and move them just a tiny, excuse me. Control Z is your friend here. And I'm going to grab a bunch of these and move them all at once with the window pane. Get them somewhere I like them a little better. While I'm at it, I'll select this one and turn on its control points so I can move all of those at once. And I want to move them down and to the right a bit. And now I can work on a point like this. Same as on the other side, this actually doesn't matter. You're not going to see it when we're done. But it's nice to keep it a little bit straightened out. Okay, we've got the two vectors, or actually four vectors if you count them, and I've left them separated for a reason that you'll see in a while. Okay, we need to make a decision here, and the decision is how thick do we want this and how is it actually supposed to look. I'm going to double click on my top view here, and that'll give me all four viewports, and I can look here in the perspective and see where I'm at. I'm going to turn off the control points, and I know that we're going to zoom up a bit so that we don't end up with that. Okay, and I know that this one is going to be the upper one, so I'm going to move it up, and don't worry about the distance that you're seeing there. This is all visual at this point. As I mentioned in the beginning, these are vectors. We can scale this up to wherever we need it when we're all done. So I've moved this up. But what I'm going to do is actually move it up way more than it needs to be, because we're about to try something a little different here. We now have this one above this one. Let's go back to looking at the top view. And I'm going to turn off my default layer so the curves go, some of the curves go away. When we look at this, it appears that this side is much higher than this side, and that's confirmed because we have an element coming through that passes over the top of this one and then goes underneath this side. So that means that this is slanted or possibly a curve. Hard to say what it is from the drawing, but we'll take a look at a few different things. I'm going to go ahead and turn my layers back on and go to the front view, which is here. And I want to create something so I can slant this. So I'm going to double click on the front so I have that, and I'm going to draw just an interpolated thing here. And the reason I'm using interpolated instead of a straight line is so that if I want to play with this a little bit, I'll be able to. So I'm just going to come in here. It doesn't matter if it's straight or not, actually. In fact, I'm going to make sure it isn't. I'm going to finish it off and probably move it down just a little bit. And I think these 2 points I want to move up, so it's got a little bit of a curvature up there, and possibly this point down a bit, increase that curvature. Okay, so what we have now, going to the perspective view, is this line out here, and I'm going to move it in. Whoops. Like I say, Control Z is your friend when you pick the wrong thing. Pick the line, and I'm going to move it in a little bit closer so we can see what we're actually doing here, and even closer than that. So this is the line between them. One of the reasons I use the gumball is because I can extrude extremely fast without having to come over and select this menu item. All I need to do is click on this little round dot and pull it out, and I can extrude a surface. I'm going to double check that the surface is totally under my piece, and it is. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to project these two curves onto this surface so that they're no longer flat, but they actually have a curve. So let's go ahead and select both of them, and I have a command that I use a lot, this project to surface, and it's right over here on my left menu bar. project curves. And all I need to do is select this surface, click enter, and you'll see that my curves have moved down there. Now they haven't changed where they are in terms of the X and Y plane. Let's take a look from the top, and we'll go ahead and hide the surface so we can look right through, and you'll notice you don't see any change. That's what we wanted. We wanted these to be exactly where they were in the XY view. We'll unhide the objects, and in my workflow, I don't want to lose the surface that's inside of these curves. One of the things is I do not need these two curves anymore. There's a tendency when you first start to try to save all your geometry just in case you need to go back. Well, once you understand how this works, you will understand that if you do need these flat curves back, you can just create a flat plane here and project the curves you have here onto it, and you'll be back where you were. So I'm going to select both of those and delete them so they're not confusing us. And then the other thing I need to do is I need to select this curve and this curve, and I need to join them. And now that I have them selected, all I'm doing is pressing the J on the keyboard for join, and these two are together. And the next command I'll use is the trim, and I want to trim away all of that outside surface. Press enter, and I'm done. To do what I'm going to do next, I need to break these two curves back because we're going to do a two-rail sweep. So I'll select the curve again. That's interesting. I had an extra curve under there. I'll select the curve again, and I'm going to split it. So, by the way, that's a mistake. Split works in, you select the command first, and then select the objects to split, which is this. And then I need to select a point to split them. When you're splitting curves and you use point, quite often you need to use 2 points. So I'm going to split at that point and that point, and I'm back to my two original curves, as you can see here. Okay, next thing to do is we need to create the cross sections for the two-rail sweep. So I'll select the two-rail, excuse me, that was a mistake too. So what I'll do is I'm going to use just the line tool here, and I'm going to draw a line from this point to this point, and I'm going to repeat the command by right mouse clicking, which is the enter, and I'm going to create a line there. The two curves I just created, or lines, are what are known as degree 1 curves. That means I can't bend them. I can just move them or move their endpoints. So I'm going to change that by selecting both of them and using the rebuild curve command on both of these. And from experience, I know that I want 4 points. If I go to 3 points, it's going to go to degree 2, which means that these will be true arcs, not Bezier curves. So I'm going to go back to 4 points and to 3 degree, and click OK. And you'll see why I'm doing that in a minute. I'm just, for a test, I'm going to run these as straight and get our shape, and you'll see what it looks like. Then I'm going to come back and change that. So let's do our two-rail sweep. I'm going to pick this curve and this curve, and now I need my cross sections. And one of the little secrets, I guess you might call it, is when you pick these sections, try to pick them near the same curve on both ends, and you won't have to go through a lot of the adjusting endpoint pointers and all that. And you can see we now have a surface created. Let's do the same thing for the other surface. Right mouse click to repeat the command. I'm going to select that curve, and now it wants a cross section there and there, and say OK. Let's zoom out a little bit, and let's go to the top view and see what we've created. It's starting to look like the part we wanted. However, it seems that for some odd reason we got off here on this lower curve or didn't adjust it when we were supposed to. That's not really a very big deal. I'm going to hide this curve so it doesn't get in our way, and I'm going to get rid of the surfaces we just created because obviously they're wrong. And yeah, we can see that I forgot to adjust this curve. So we're going to select it, go to the top view, and let's pull these points out where they belong. Turn on the control points so we don't lose them. And I'm going to grab these two and pull them out a ways. Grab these, whoops, if you grab something, use that control Z curve command. Pull these out a bit. Pull these two down. You can see the editing in Rhino of a curve is quite nice. I can even rebuild a curve after I do this. And I wasn't paying attention because I'm making a video, so that doesn't help anything. Let's get this. Obviously we got another point in here somewhere. Okay. Now you may notice that this has gotten all nice and wide in here, and you could get all worried about that. This is what I was talking about earlier, where the person who drew it, this isn't actually physically possible what he's drawn here, I don't believe. Anyhow, we're not going to dwell on that. We'll go back to our view here, turn our control points off. By the way, when you're in perspective view, you need to hold down the shift key to pan. Going to repeat our 2-rail sweep. By the way, if you get tired of this pop-up menu, if it bothers you, it doesn't bother me, so I never mess with it. You can come over here and just tell it you only want it to select curves, and it won't pop that up. Watch. I'm going to tell it only select curves. So now it's got that, and like before, we're selecting our cross-section rails, and this is okay. And I'm going to repeat the command and select here, and notice now it's close to 2 curves. I'm going to say none, start out again, move away from that other curve. Yeah, it's still going to give us 2 curve choice. And now we got that. That. Sometimes when I'm making a video, it's easy to lose track of where I'm at, so I just picked the wrong curves and didn't create what I wanted. So I'll start again. Pick that curve, I need this rail, and I need this rail. And now I got the surface I need. Let's take a look at that top view again and see if it looks better. There we go. So we've got this pretty neat sweep. Now I'm not real proud of this curve in here. It could be a little more what they call fair, but this is just a demo. So we now have that. Now what I would like to do is create a solid out of this. Things like 3D printers like solids. They don't like open surfaces. So let's go about creating a solid out of this. First thing I'm going to do is turn on all my selection options so I can select the surfaces. I'm going to select that one, hold down the shift key, select that one, and also grab the inner one. And once again, it's just a matter of pushing the J for join. And it'll put those 3 surfaces together. Now that they're together, I can close the bottom. And that's quite easy to do. Just select it, and I have my cap planar holes right here, so it's capped them. And the way you verify that you have a solid, one of the ways, is to click on your properties and just look at the type, and it says closed poly surface. That's what we're looking for. Let's go up to our top view again, and what we're going to do is turn off the bitmap so we just see our beautiful work. And now I'm going to do a little organization here. I'm going to come over to layer 1 and click on it, and I'm going to call it C-shape. And while I'm at it, I'm going to create a sublayer under it, and I'm going to call that construction, and just C-O-N-S-T for construction. I'm going to select only curves, and I'm going to grab all of our curves, and I'm going to move them to this object layer, and then I'm going to turn it off. So that leaves us with just our 3D model to look at. Let's go to perspective, and we can see what we got. Go back to top view, and I'm also going to move, if I turn all my selections on, I'm going to move the model to the layer called C-shape. So I'll change object layer, and you can see that that object layer is in red. I think I'm going to make that black. I personally like to leave things like that. And I'm going to change the material. And an easy way to do this is use the default material on the default layer, right mouse click, say match properties, and you want to match them to the default layer, click OK, and we've done that. Now we're going to do a render, and you can see what your piece looks like rendered. Now, is this a beautiful model? I don't think so. I went through it fairly fast. To my eye, I can see some issues with curvature, things like that, so it's a good idea to take your time when you're creating these things. But this isn't bad for a start.